Estella Whitmore sat alone on a worn bench near the pier, the city just starting to stir behind her. In her hand, she clutched a small silver locket, cool against her palm. Her wedding ring sat beside her on the bench, catching the weak morning light. She stared at it with hollow eyes, her heart a tangle of regret and confusion. How did it come to this? A gust of wind tugged at her silk scarf, and she let it go, watching it twist and dance away over the river. She pulled the locket closer to her chest, closed her eyes, and breathed deep, like she could rewind time if she tried hard enough. Everything had started with one stupid, reckless night. 3 weeks earlier, under the heavy humidity of a Savannah Friday night, the jazz bar on Broughton Street pulsed with low lights and slower songs. It was a small, timeless place, walls lined with black and white photos of musicians who had played here decades ago. Estella Whitmore walked in, wearing a midnight blue dress, sharp heels, and a storm swirling inside her chest. Heads turned. They always did. But she ignored them, her eyes scanning the room until she found an empty stool at the bar. She ordered bourbon, neat. The bartender, an older woman with a tired smile, slid it across without asking questions. Estella offered a tight nod in thanks and tossed back a gulp, savoring the sharp burn. It was the kind of night that begged for bad decisions. Her life had been too polished, too suffocating lately. Grand hotels, board meetings, charity galas, all gilded cages with her name etched on every bar. Tonight, she wanted to forget. From a shadowed corner, someone was watching her. She felt it before she saw him. A steady gaze, not the usual lingering or leering she was used to. It was different. Curious, calm. She turned slightly, meeting his eyes across the dim room. He wore worn jeans, a simple white shirt, and a faded denim jacket. Messy hair, an easy posture, a quiet kind of defiance. Like he didn't care what anyone thought. Good, she thought bitterly. Neither did she. Another, she said to the bartender, her voice sharper than intended. The woman just nodded and refilled her glass. Estella grabbed her drink, rose from her stool, and crossed the room with the kind of reckless confidence that usually came right before disaster. She stopped in front of the stranger's table, tilted her head, and locked eyes with him. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me, either way. "What's your deal?" she asked, voice low, almost daring him to flinch. He blinked, surprised, but not rattled. "Just sitting here," he said simply. Estella laughed once, dry and short. "Sitting?" "Staring, more like it. What? You think you're different from the others?" The man leaned back, studying her. "Maybe I am," she smirked, the liquor warming her blood, loosening her fear. "You look like you've got something to prove." "Maybe," he said again, tilting his head. "Depends on what you're asking." Estella smiled then, a slow, dangerous smile. She slipped her arms out of her jacket and let it slide off her shoulders, pooling on the floor. She stood there in her silk dress, vulnerable and bold under the flickering lights, every eye in the bar flickering toward her and then away again. "Prove you're worth something," she said, folding her arms. "Or are you just another fool wasting my time?" For a second, he just looked at her. Not at her body, at her, steady, patient. And then he smiled, not cocky, not defensive, just warm, sad almost. "You're trouble," he said quietly. "And you're boring," she shot back, stepping closer. "Real men take risks." A slow beat passed between them. The buzz of conversation, the clink of glasses, the lazy hum of a saxophone melted away. "What's your name?" he asked. "Estella," she said, lifting her chin. And yours? Allison, he replied without hesitation. She laughed again, shaking her head. Allison? What kind of name is that for a man? He shrugged, unconcerned. The kind my mother gave me. You got a problem with it? Estella stared at him, weighing his calm against the chaos she felt spinning inside her. All right, Allison, she said, voice rich with sarcasm. Let's do something crazy. His mouth twitched into a smile. Like what? Marry me, she said. The words hung between them, bold and absurd. Even the bartender glanced up, eyebrows lifting. Estella waited, daring him to back down, to laugh, to prove he was just another coward. But Allison just stood, tall and steady, slipping a few bills onto the table. All right, he said simply. Let's go. Her breath caught just for a second, but she masked it with a wild grin. She grabbed her fallen jacket, slung it over one shoulder, and let him lead the way out into the thick night air. They wandered toward the river, the humidity heavy on their skin, laughter bubbling between them like something alive and reckless. Estella stumbled once, laughing harder, and Allison caught her elbow lightly, steadying her without a word. A block from the river they found a chapel, old, whitewashed, leaning a little sideways like it had seen better days. The small wooden sign out front read, "Midnight Weddings, no questions asked." Perfect. The pastor, an elderly man with a kindly face and a soft drawl, barely looked up from his ledger. Estella and Allison filled out the necessary paperwork, fake last names, fake addresses, real enough signatures, and stumbled down the aisle to the simple wooden altar. "Do you take this man?" the pastor intoned. Estella looked up at Allison, his green eyes, calm, steady, still somehow seeing through her. "Sure, why not?" she said, laughing. "And do you take this woman?" Allison's answer came without hesitation. "I do." 2 metal rings from a dusty velvet box. A brief blessing. A photo snapped with an ancient Polaroid camera. And just like that, Estella Whitmore, heiress, hotel queen, Savannah's shining star, was married to a stranger named Allison. Outside, the river breeze caught them again, and they staggered laughing into the empty street, 2 fools wrapped in silk and denim and half-forgotten dreams. Estella pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart pounding beneath the locket hidden under her dress. Ivy's locket. Her mother's locket. She hadn't taken it off once since the funeral. Maybe it was the bourbon. Maybe it was the ache that never really left. Maybe it was fate. But for the first time in years, Estella felt alive. And somewhere deep inside, beyond all the whiskey and loneliness, a tiny voice whispered, "Be careful. Everything changes after tonight." If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The early morning air hung thick over Savannah as Estella leaned against the chipped railing of the chapel, her silk dress clinging to her skin. Allison stood a few feet away, hands tucked casually in the pockets of his worn jeans, his face turned up toward the fading stars. Neither spoke for a moment. The city was just beginning to stir awake, but here in this pocket of forgotten streets and sagging buildings, they could have been the last 2 people on Earth. Estella watched him, heart still pounding, the weight of the locket around her neck grounding her more than she cared to admit. Last night had felt like a dream, wild, reckless, freeing. But the gray light of dawn gnawed at the edges of her bravado. "Well?" she said, voice rough with fatigue and leftover whiskey. "Guess we did it." Allison turned to her, a small, wry smile playing on his lips. "Looks that way." She hugged her arms around herself. the chill of morning finally sinking into her skin. "You don't seem too worried." He shrugged lightly. "You don't seem too sure." A sharp laugh escaped her, more bitter than amused. "Maybe because I just married a stranger outside a river in the middle of the night." "Technically," he said, stepping closer, "you dared a stranger to marry you, and he was dumb enough to say yes." The warmth of his presence brushed against her, unsettling her more than the night's chaos ever had. She stepped back instinctively, bumping against the chapel's railing. "You could at least pretend to be concerned," she muttered, fiddling with the thin, cheap ring now circling her finger. He studied her for a beat, his gaze uncomfortably steady. "Are you?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to be furious, to blame him for agreeing, to shove the responsibility onto someone else. But the truth clanged louder in her chest. She'd set this in motion. She, not him. She broke eye contact first, looking down the empty street, wishing for the city noise to drown out the mess in her head. "Where do we go from here, husband?" she said, the word tasting foreign and absurd on her tongue. Allison chuckled under his breath. "Breakfast?" She stared at him. "Seriously?" He smiled wider. "You'll feel less like killing me after coffee and pancakes." Against her will, a small snort slipped out. She shook her head. "You're impossible." "I'm practical," he said, stepping off the curb and beckoning her with 2 fingers. "Come on." "There's a diner a few blocks away." Estella hesitated. She could walk away, call a driver, bury this night under layers of money and lawyers and non-disclosure agreements. Or she could follow this maddening stranger, her husband, into the unknown. The locket pressed cold against her heart. With a muttered curse, she grabbed her jacket off the chapel steps and hurried after him. They walked in silence, the early city noises rising around them, delivery trucks rumbling, the clink of cafe chairs being set outside, the smell of baking bread rolling down the streets like a living thing. The diner was a squat brick building with fogged-up windows and a neon sign that buzzed lazily in the growing daylight. Inside, it smelled like burnt coffee and syrup and something warm that tugged at a part of Estella she hadn't visited in years. They slid into a cracked vinyl booth by the window. A waitress appeared with menus and a tired smile, and Allison ordered coffee for both, without even glancing at Estella. She arched an eyebrow. "Assuming you know what I want now?" "You look like you need it," he said easily, leaning back against the booth like they did this every Sunday. Estella opened her mouth to snap back, but paused as the waitress set the mugs down. The coffee was hot, black, no nonsense. She wrapped her hands around the cup, grateful for the warmth. "So," she said, staring into the dark liquid. "Tell me, Allison, what's your story? What kind of man agrees to marry a total stranger?" He stirred a packet of sugar into his mug with lazy precision. "Maybe the kind who needed to be reminded what living feels like." She blinked at him, thrown by the simple honesty of it. "You're not curious about me?" she asked, defensive despite herself. He smiled slightly. "Not curious, just watchful." She bristled. "Watchful sounds a lot like judgment." "It's not," he said, voice softer now. I saw you sitting there. You looked like you were ready to burn the whole world down." Estella stiffened. "You don't know anything about me," she said, voice low. "No," he agreed, "but I know that look. And I know what it feels like to want to escape your own life for one night." The silence between them grew heavier, woven with things neither was ready to say. Estella sipped her coffee, the bitterness waking something sharp and raw inside her. "You from around here?" she asked finally. He shrugged. "Savannah's close enough. Grew up a few hours inland. Drifted back when the world got too loud. Vague. Too vague. Another puzzle piece that didn't fit neatly anywhere. "And you?" he asked. Her lips twitched humorlessly. "I own half the hotels you've probably never stayed in." His eyes twinkled, amused but not mocking. "Sounds exhausting." "It is," she said before she could stop herself. The waitress returned, and they ordered pancakes for him, a bagel, and fruit for her. The normalcy of it all made her head spin. They ate quietly for a while, the clink of forks and soft murmur of other early patrons filling the gaps. After a few minutes, Allison set his fork down and leaned in slightly. "You planning to get it annulled?" he asked casually, like he was asking about the weather. Estella froze, mid-bite. She hadn't let herself think that far ahead yet. Logic screamed yes. Fix it. Erase the night. Go back to the life you can control. But somewhere deep in her gut, an ache answered first. "I don't know," she admitted, shocking herself with the truth. His smile was small but real. "Then let's not rush." She laughed once, sharp. "You make it sound so easy." "Maybe it is," he said, sipping his coffee. "Maybe hard's just what everyone expects." The way he said it, simple, unburdened, made her chest tighten painfully. She pushed her plate away, appetite gone. "This isn't real," she said, half to herself. "This can't be real." "It's as real as you want it to be," Allison said, folding his hands on the table. Estella stared at him, something fragile and terrifying blooming in her chest. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed sharply against the tabletop, splintering the moment. She glanced at the screen. Walter Whitmore. Her grandfather. The weight of her real life slammed back down around her shoulders. Estella took a steadying breath, the locket around her neck suddenly heavier than ever. "I have to go," she said, voice flat. Allison nodded, unbothered. "I'll walk you out." They stepped into the warming light of morning together, the streets alive now, bustling with people who had no idea the chaos swirling inside her. Estella paused on the sidewalk, uncertain. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words foreign on her tongue. Allison only smiled and nodded, stepping back toward the diner. As she slipped into a waiting town car, Estella pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. She was running out of places to hide, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure she wanted to. The sun burned higher over Savannah by the time Estella's town car pulled into the private driveway of the Whitmore estate. The heavy iron gates creaked open slowly, as if even they were reluctant to let her back into this world of manicured lies. She sat stiffly in the leather seat, clutching her phone, Walter's name still glaring from the last missed call. The locket around her neck felt heavier than ever. "Miss Whitmore?" the driver said, glancing at her in the mirror. "I'm fine," she lied, pushing the door open before he could get out. The sprawling estate stretched before her, white columns gleaming, windows glinting like judgmental eyes. As she climbed the marble steps, her heels clicked sharply against the stone, each step hammering in the reality she could no longer outrun. Inside, the scent of old wood and polished silver wrapped around her like a noose. She found Walter in the sunroom, a newspaper folded neatly in his lap, a glass of iced tea sweating on the table beside him. He didn't look up when she entered, but she knew better than to think he wasn't aware of every move she made. "You're late," he said, his voice a low rumble. Estella smoothed her hair back with trembling fingers. Something came up. Walter finally looked at her then, his sharp blue eyes narrowing slightly. He took in her wrinkled dress, the faint smear of mascara under her eyes, the air of someone who'd been out all night. "Sit," he said, nodding to the chair across from him. Estella obeyed, the leather seat cold against her skin. She crossed her legs tightly, gripping the edge of the chair like it could anchor her. Walter set his paper aside with slow, deliberate movements. "Tell me," he said, voice deceptively mild, "what disaster you've managed to create this time." Estella lifted her chin, refusing to flinch. "I got married." Silence dropped between them like a stone into still water. Walter stared at her, unreadable. "Come again?" "I got married," she repeated, voice steady despite the chaos inside her. "Last night." "His name is Allison." Walter leaned back slowly, studying her as if she were a stranger who had wandered into his house by mistake. "To whom?" he asked at last. Estella hesitated, a flicker of doubt flashing through her chest. She barely knew anything about Allison, his full name, his background, his family, but she steeled herself. "Someone real," she said. "Not one of those vultures circling Whitmore hotels. Not someone after our name or our money." Walter tapped his fingers against the arm of his chair. "Real," he echoed. "And how exactly did you meet this paragon of virtue?" Estella swallowed hard. "At a bar." Walter snorted softly, a sound of pure disbelief. "Perfect." She bristled, anger sparking to life under her skin. "You wanted me married, didn't you?" "Settled? Anchored? Well, here I am." "I wanted you stable," Walter said sharply. "Not reckless, not shackled to some drifter you picked up after 2 drinks. Estella surged to her feet, pacing the room to keep from screaming. "You don't know him," she said fiercely. "You don't know anything about him. Neither do you," Walter said, voice like iron. She turned to face him, breathing hard. "I know enough." Walter studied her for a long moment, then sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You've always been impulsive," he said, almost weary. "It's your mother in you. Ivy was the same way." The mention of her mother's name twisted something sharp and painful inside Estella. She pressed her hand against the locket through the fabric of her dress, as if she could draw strength from it. "I'm not her," she said quietly. "No," Walter agreed, his voice unexpectedly soft. "You're you, and you're going to fix this." Estella's heart thudded painfully. "What do you mean?" Walter picked up his tea, swirling the ice absently. "You're going to bring him here tonight, dinner. I want to meet the man who thought marrying my granddaughter in a bar was a good idea." She opened her mouth to argue, but he held up a hand. "No excuses, no delays. If he's part of this family now, he damn well better prove he's worth it." Estella stared at him, feeling trapped, cornered by walls she couldn't see but could feel closing in. "Fine," she said, the word scraping her throat. Walter nodded once, satisfied. 7 o'clock sharp. She turned on her heel and strode from the room before he could see the panic rising in her eyes. Once outside, she leaned against one of the cold marble columns, trying to catch her breath. She pulled out her phone, staring at Allison's number, her thumb hovering over the screen. How was she supposed to explain this? How was she supposed to drag him into the lion's den when they barely knew each other's last names? She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, and then his voice came through, warm and amused. "Estella Whitmore," he drawled. "Miss me already?" She almost laughed, but it came out broken. "We have a dinner invitation," she said, forcing her voice steady. "Tonight, my grandfather's house." 7. There was a beat of silence, and she could almost see him smiling. "I take it this isn't optional." "Not unless you want to be hunted down by Savannah's finest social spies," she said, half joking, half terrified. He chuckled softly. "Sounds like a party." Estella sagged against the column, the fight bleeding out of her. "Allison," she said quietly, "you don't have to." "I'll be there," he said firmly. "Where should I meet you?" She gave him the address, heart hammering so loudly she could barely hear herself speak. "I'll find something clean to wear," he teased gently. She closed her eyes, letting his lightness anchor her. "Thank you," she whispered before she could stop herself. There was a pause, and then his voice, softer now. "You're welcome, Estella. See you soon." The line clicked dead, and Estella lowered the phone slowly. She didn't know what terrified her more, bringing him into her world, or the growing part of her that desperately wanted him to stay. The clock on the mantel ticked too loudly in the grand sitting room, each second dragging Estella closer to the moment she wasn't sure she could survive. She paced across the Persian rug, her heels making soft, anxious taps against the polished wood floors. Outside the towering windows, the savannah sky had turned a deep, syrupy gold, spilling warm light across the manicured lawns. Inside, the tension was colder, heavier. Walter sat in his usual armchair, wearing a navy blazer and a face carved from stone. His cane rested beside him, a silent symbol of the authority he wielded without raising his voice. Estella's heart squeezed painfully. She had faced corporate boards, investors, entire cities full of judgmental stares, but nothing unraveled her faster than the steady, sharp gaze of Walter Whitmore. "Calm down," Walter said without looking up from his newspaper. "You're wearing a groove in my floor." Estella forced herself to stop pacing but crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "I'm fine," Walter grunted, unconvinced. She turned toward the front windows, scanning the long driveway that cut through the oaks. Any second now, Allison would pull up. Any second now, her two worlds would crash into each other. Her carefully curated life of legacy and expectation meeting the strange, impulsive man she'd dragged home from the edge of madness. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A message from Flora, her assistant, blinked across the screen. "Flora, good luck tonight. Call if you need an escape plan." Estella smiled grimly, tucking the phone away. There would be no escaping this. A low rumble of an engine drifted through the evening air, and her stomach dropped. She stepped closer to the window, heart hammering. A battered old pickup truck, of all things, turned onto the driveway, kicking up a trail of dust behind it. Walter's paper rustled as he shifted slightly. "Is that him?" Estella swallowed hard. "That's him." The truck pulled to a stop in front of the sweeping stone steps. The door creaked open, and Allison stepped out, wearing clean jeans, a crisp white button-down, and a navy blazer that almost looked like it belonged here. His hair was neatly combed back, his jaw freshly shaved, but there was no hiding the easy, unaffected way he moved, so different from the men Estella usually knew. He paused at the bottom of the steps, looking up at the house like it was another world entirely. And for a second, Estella wondered if he would turn and leave. But then he smiled, small, steady, and started up the stairs. Estella met him at the door, stepping outside before Walter could call out any commentary. "You clean up nice," she said under her breath, trying for lightness but feeling the tremor in her voice. "Thanks," Allison said, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Borrowed Moses' iron." She laughed despite herself, nerves crackling under her skin. "You ready for this?" she asked, voice lower now, serious. He glanced past her at the grand house, then back at her, his gaze softening. "Only because you're here." Her breath hitched, unprepared for the quiet sincerity. Before she could respond, Walter's voice rang out from inside. "Bring him in before he gets lost." Estella winced, and motioned for Allison to follow her. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and old money. Allison's gaze flicked over the gleaming floors, the towering ceilings, the portraits of grim-faced ancestors lining the walls. If he was intimidated, he didn't show it. Walter rose slowly as they entered, leaning heavily on his cane. His sharp eyes raked over Allison, sizing him up in a single sweep. "Allison," Estella said, clearing her throat, "this is my grandfather, Walter Whitmore." Allison stepped forward, extending a hand. "Sir," he said simply. Walter studied him a beat longer, then shook his hand. Firm, brief. "Sit," Walter said, gesturing to the sofas. They settled into an awkward triangle, Estella perched on the edge of her seat. Allison relaxed, but alert, Walter commanding the room without trying. Walter steepled his fingers. "So, tell me, son." "What do you do?" Estella held her breath. "Bit of everything," Allison said easily. "Mostly helping out a friend with his bakery downtown." Walter's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Baker, eh?" "Sometimes," Allison said, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Fix things when they break. Drive deliveries." "Whatever's needed," Walter grunted. "Honest work." Estella blinked, startled by the lack of immediate disdain. Walter hated laziness more than poverty. Maybe that was her one saving grace. "And you?" Walter continued, turning his gaze back to Estella. "What exactly were you thinking?" Estella lifted her chin. "I was thinking," she said carefully, "that I'm tired of being measured by profit margins and merger offers. I wanted something real." Walter's eyes narrowed. "And you found it in a midnight wedding to a stranger?" "I found it," she said, voice firmer now, "in someone who saw me, not the Whitmore name." Silence, the kind that stretched taut between walls and bloodlines. Walter's face was unreadable for a long, punishing moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded once. "Maybe you did," he said. Estella almost sagged with relief. The butler appeared in the doorway then, announcing dinner was served, saving her from saying something foolish. They moved into the dining room, the heavy chandelier casting golden light over the gleaming table. Estella and Allison sat side by side. Walter took his usual seat at the head. The meal unfolded in fits and starts. Roast chicken, buttered greens, cornbread fresh from the oven. Walter questioned Allison about his upbringing, his opinions on small business ownership, his favorite sports teams. Allison answered easily, never defensive, never trying too hard. Slowly, Estella felt some of the icy air melt around them. At one point, as Walter was pouring himself more tea, Allison leaned over and murmured to Estella, "Your grandfather could out-grill any corporate boardroom shark." She bit her lip to suppress a laugh, shoulders relaxing for the first time all evening. After dessert, a peach cobbler that Allison praised so enthusiastically, even Walter cracked a smile. They retired back to the sitting room. Walter looked at them both for a long moment, then spoke. "Marriage," he said slowly, "isn't about grand gestures or whirlwind nights. It's about showing up every damn day." Estella felt the weight of those words sink into her bones. Walter turned his gaze to Allison. "If you're planning to run when things get hard, better do it now." Allison met his stare without flinching. "I'm not going anywhere." Another long pause. Then Walter leaned back, nodding. "Good," he said simply. Estella's throat tightened painfully. As Allison and Walter continued talking, she sat quietly, the locket warm against her chest, her heart warring between fear and something dangerously close to hope. Because somehow, in the course of one impossible night and one impossible dinner, Allison Hartwell, her reckless, maddening husband, was starting to feel terrifyingly real. Morning light slanted through the wide windows of Estella's downtown condo, gilding everything in a soft, forgiving glow that didn't match the knot of tension in her stomach. She stood barefoot in her kitchen, clutching a mug of coffee she'd barely touched. Across the room, Allison leaned against the counter, sipping from a chipped mug she'd never seen before. He must have brought it from his place. Somehow, without fanfare, he was already leaving fingerprints on her world. The events of the previous night looped through her mind in vivid snapshots. Walter's scrutiny, the way Allison had deflected every sharp question with calm grace, the rare, grudging approval that had softened her grandfather's steel gaze by dessert. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt terrifying. Because now, this wasn't just a joke or a reckless mistake. It was becoming real. "You're quiet," Allison said, setting his mug down with a soft clink. Estella shrugged, taking a small sip of her coffee. It tasted burnt. "Just tired," she said. He watched her for a moment, that maddening, unhurried way of his that made her feel like he could see right past the walls she spent her life building. "You regret it?" he said, not accusing, not sad. Just fact. She opened her mouth to deny it, but closed it again. What was the point of lying to him when she couldn't even lie to herself? "I don't know what I feel," she admitted, voice low. Allison nodded once, as if that answer made perfect sense. He pushed off the counter, moving toward her with that easy grace that always seemed slightly out of place in her rigid, ordered world. "You don't have to decide today," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "Or tomorrow, or even next week." His voice was steady, grounding. "Then why does it feel like everything's already spinning out of control?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. He gave a small, lopsided smile. "Maybe because, for once, you're not steering the ship." She laughed, a short, breathless sound. "You're infuriating." "So I've been told." For a moment they stood there, suspended between too many words and not enough. Then Estella sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I have meetings this morning," she said. "Contracts, inspections, endless signatures. The glamorous life," he teased gently. She smiled thinly. Something like that. A beat of silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither dared name. "You'll be okay," Allison said quietly. "You're tougher than you think." And then, without waiting for permission, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers were warm, calloused, careful. The simple touch unraveled something tight inside her chest. She stepped back before she could betray herself further. "I'll see you tonight," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Count on it," he said with a soft smile. She left before she could change her mind, the door clicking shut behind her a little harder than necessary. The drive to Whitmore Hotel's corporate office was a blur. Savannah's historic squares and brick-lined streets passed in a smear of color and noise, her mind racing faster than the car. She didn't want to think about how natural Allison had looked in her kitchen, like he belonged there. She didn't want to think about how part of her hadn't wanted to leave. But she couldn't afford distractions. Not now. Flora was waiting for her in the lobby, tablet in hand. A bright smile pasted on her face that faltered slightly when she saw Estella's expression. "Tough night?" Flora asked, falling into step beside her. "You have no idea," Estella muttered. Flora handed her the day's schedule, filled to the brim with meetings and inspections. First up, the Riverbend project. "The investors are getting jumpy." "Let them jump," Estella said under her breath. They rode the elevator in silence. When the doors slid open, Estella straightened her shoulders, slid her professional mask into place, and marched into the boardroom like a general into battle. The meeting dragged, a blur of spreadsheets, projections, and cautious coded concerns from men who smiled too much and trusted too little. Estella nodded, answered, reassured, all while her mind kept drifting back to a pair of steady green eyes and a calm voice that said she didn't have to figure everything out today. It was maddening. After 2 hours, the meeting broke, and Estella escaped to her office, sinking into the leather chair with a groan. Flora followed, closing the door behind her. "You want the good news or the bad news?" Flora asked. Estella rubbed her temples. "Neither." Flora chuckled but sobered quickly. "Brandon Ellis is back in town." Estella's head snapped up. "Brandon?" Flora nodded grimly. "He was spotted at the Harbor Club last night. Word is he's sniffing around investors." A cold knot formed in Estella's stomach. Brandon had been her biggest mistake. Charming, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. Their breakup had been public, ugly, and had cost her more than she liked to admit. "Keep an eye on him," she said tightly. "I don't want any surprises." "Already on it," Flora said, tapping her tablet. "But Estella, if he's poking around, it's not just business." Estella frowned. "What do you mean?" Flora hesitated. "Word is, he knows about you and Allison." The blood drained from Estella's face. "He doesn't know anything," she said, more forcefully than she felt. "Maybe not facts," Flora said carefully. "But rumors spread fast, especially in Savannah. And Brandon's the type to turn whispers into weapons." Estella stared out the window, her heart thudding dully against her ribs. First her impulsive marriage. Now her past crawling back to life. It felt like the ground was shifting under her feet, faster than she could anchor herself. "You okay?" Flora asked gently. Estella forced a smile. "I'm fine." It was a lie, but it was one she needed to believe right now. Later, when the day finally bled into evening and Estella drove back home, the soft glow of light spilled from her windows, warm and welcoming. She hesitated at the curb, heart hammering, irrational fear pinning her in place. But then she saw him, Allison, standing in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, moving like he belonged there. And for a moment, just a moment, she let herself believe he did. The smell of something warm and rich drifted through the condo as Estella closed the door behind her, slipping her heels off with a sigh. For a moment, she simply stood there, the soft lamplight pooling around her, the low hum of Allison moving in the kitchen filling the silence that had ruled her life for so long. She wasn't ready for this, and yet she couldn't bring herself to leave. "Hey," Allison called over his shoulder, his voice easy, natural. "Hope you're hungry." She drifted toward the kitchen, drawn by the scent and by something she didn't dare name. He stood at the stove, stirring a pot of something thick and golden. A loaf of fresh bread sat on the counter, a bottle of wine breathing beside it. "You didn't have to do all this," Estella said, her voice quieter than she intended. He glanced back at her, that familiar easy smile tugging at his lips. "Didn't have to." "Wanted to." She hesitated at the edge of the room, feeling suddenly like an intruder in her own home. "Why?" Allison's smile faded, replaced by something gentler. "Because life's heavy enough without coming home to an empty kitchen." The words hit harder than they should have, cracking a piece of the armor she wore so tightly around her heart. She crossed her arms, hugging herself. "You don't even know me." "Maybe," he said, ladling the soup into 2 bowls. "Or maybe I know enough." She didn't answer. Couldn't. He set the bowls on the counter, pulling out 2 stools. "Come eat before it gets cold." Estella moved mechanically, sliding onto the stool opposite him. The soup was creamy, fragrant with herbs, and something that smelled suspiciously like memory. Something Ivy might have made on rainy Sundays when the world outside had felt less cruel. She took a small sip, and the taste bloomed across her tongue, rich and comforting. "You cook like someone who actually cares," she said, almost accusing. Allison chuckled. "Bad habit, I guess." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The clink of spoons against bowls the only sound. Finally, Estella set her spoon down, her appetite gone even as her body warmed from the food. "Brandon Ellis is back," she said quietly. Allison didn't flinch, didn't ask who Brandon was. He simply met her eyes and waited. He's not good news," she said, voice tightening. She broke off, swallowing hard. It ended badly. Still, Allison said nothing, letting her fill the silence on her own terms. "And now he's back," she finished, feeling foolish and small. "What does he want?" Allison asked, his voice steady. She shook her head. "I don't know. Leverage, maybe. Chaos. He feeds off it." Allison leaned forward, resting his forearms on the counter. "And you think marrying me gave him ammo?" Estella winced. "It's not about you. It's about perception. Savannah loves a good scandal. And if Brandon can make it look like I'm spiraling—" "You're not," Allison said firmly. She laughed, bitter. "A secret marriage to a stranger." "Looks pretty close." "Maybe," he allowed. "But they don't know the whole story. They never do." The simple certainty in his voice cut through the fog in her mind. "You're taking this awfully well," she said, suspicious. He shrugged. "Maybe I don't scare easy." "Maybe you're an idiot," she said, but there was no venom in it. He grinned. "Wouldn't be the first time." She stared at him, something twisting painfully in her chest. How could he be so calm when her entire world felt like it was balancing on a crumbling ledge? "You should go," she said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could think. He blinked, the smile fading. "What?" "You should leave," she said, pushing back from the counter. This isn't your fight." Allison rose slowly, watching her with that steady gaze that unnerved her more than shouting ever could. "You think I didn't know it wouldn't be easy?" he asked quietly. "You didn't sign up for this," she insisted, heart pounding. "For Brandon, for whispers and judgment, for me." He stepped around the counter, stopping a breath away from her. "I married you, Estella," he said, voice low, fierce in a way that wasn't angry but unshakably real. "You dared me, and I said yes, and I don't back out just because the ride gets bumpy." Tears burned behind her eyes, hot and humiliating. "I don't need saving," she whispered. "I'm not here to save you," he said, softer now. "I'm here because I want to be." Because somewhere in that bar, between the whiskey and the broken smiles, I saw someone worth standing beside. A tear slipped free before she could stop it. She turned away, wiping it furiously. "Don't," she said, voice cracking. "Don't say things you'll regret." "I won't," he said simply. She stood there, trembling, caught between the old instinct to run and the terrifying urge to stay. Finally, she whispered, "I'm scared." "I know," he said. "And I don't know how to do this," she confessed, her voice breaking. "We'll figure it out," Allison said. "Together." She turned then, slowly, and met his gaze. And for the first time since the night they crashed into each other's lives, Estella Whitmore allowed herself to believe he might be telling the truth. The night stretched quiet and deep around them. the weight of old fears shifting slightly, making room for something fragile and new, something that might just survive if they dared to hold on. Sunday arrived cloaked in thick savanna heat, the air heavy with the slow hum of cicadas and the faint salt scent drifting in from the river. Estella stood at the foot of Whitmore Manor's sweeping staircase, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her linen dress, her nerves fraying more with every tick of the grandfather clock down the hall. Walter had insisted, a family brunch, formal and unavoidable. And Allison, in his quiet, stubborn way, had agreed without flinching. Even now she could hear him outside on the wide front porch, talking low and easy with Flora, who had arrived early under the pretense of helping, but really to assess the situation with wide, curious eyes. Estella pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the frantic drumbeat of her heart beneath the fabric. She wasn't ready for this, for the scrutiny, for the way her world and Allison's kept colliding like slow, inevitable waves. The front door creaked open and Allison stepped inside, the sunlight catching the clean lines of his shirt, the slight curl of his hair at the collar. He looked like he belonged. Almost. If you didn't look too hard. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," he teased lightly. She gave a breathless laugh. "I'm reconsidering faking an illness." "Too late," he said, crossing the foyer to stand in front of her. His hand brushed against hers, a simple, grounding touch. "We've got this." The double doors to the dining room opened with a groan, and Walter's voice carried out, dry and expectant. "If you're done plotting your escape, we're waiting." Estella swallowed her nerves and squared her shoulders. Together, they stepped into the room. The dining room was a study in old Savannah elegance. High ceilings, a massive chandelier dripping with crystal, a table long enough to seat 20. At the far end sat Walter, king at the head of his court. Beside him, like a ghost resurrected from Estella's worst memories, sat Brandon Ellis. Estella stopped cold, the air punching out of her lungs. Brandon smiled lazily, standing to pull out a chair for her, as if they were old friends. As if he hadn't spent the last 2 years trying to dismantle everything she'd built. "Estella," he drawled, voice slick as oil, "you're as stunning as ever." Allison's hand found the small of her back, steadying her. She forced herself to move forward, every step feeling like she was walking into a trap. "Brandon," she said coolly, taking a seat midway down the table, carefully out of reach. Allison slid in beside her, his presence a quiet wall of support. Walter raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying the tension crackling through the air. "Brandon's back in town, looking at investment opportunities." "Is that what we're calling it?" Estella murmured. Brandon chuckled, unfazed. "Strictly business. Though," he said, turning his gaze deliberately to Allison, "I must admit, I'm surprised to hear about your sudden marriage." Allison's expression didn't change. He met Brandon's gaze with the same calm he met everything else. "Life's full of surprises," Allison said mildly. Brandon's smile tightened. "Indeed." The servants began to bring in platters of food, fresh biscuits, honey-glazed ham, bowls of steaming grits. But the tension at the table was thick enough to slice with a knife. Walter watched it all with thinly veiled amusement, like a man throwing a fox into the henhouse just to see what would happen. "So," Brandon said, selecting a biscuit with exaggerated care, "tell me, Allison, what is it you do?" "Bit of everything," Allison said easily, echoing the same line he'd given Walter days earlier. Brandon smirked. "Handy with your hands, then." Estella stiffened, but Allison just smiled. "Sometimes," he said. "Depends on the job." Brandon leaned back, the picture of casual malice. "Estella's always been drawn to—" Projects. The jab was unmistakable. Estella set her fork down carefully. Some projects are worth the investment. Brandon's eyes glittered with something mean. And some are just sinkholes. Allison's hand brushed against hers under the table, a small, silent reassurance. "Funny," Allison said, voice pleasant. "That sounds like something a man would say when he lost his bid." Brandon's smile faltered for half a second, just enough for Estella to see it. Walter chuckled, low and approving. The meal dragged on, every word a chess move, every smile a blade. Estella answered questions about the hotel expansion plans, fielded thinly veiled digs about her whirlwind marriage, all while fighting the rising urge to either scream or bolt. When the plates were finally cleared and Walter rose to lead Brandon out for a cigar on the veranda, Estella slumped slightly in her chair, the tension bleeding out of her muscles. Allison leaned closer, voice low. "You okay?" She nodded, but it was a lie. "You didn't tell me he'd be here," she whispered. "I didn't know," he said. "Walter's idea of entertainment, I guess." She rubbed her forehead, exhaustion pulling at her. "He's not going to go away," she said. "Brandon. He's going to dig. He's going to find something to use." Allison was silent for a moment, then said, "Let him dig." She looked at him, startled. "He won't find what he's looking for," Allison said simply. Her throat tightened painfully. "You don't know him," she said. "No," Allison said, "but I know you." The sincerity in his voice shattered something inside her. Before she could lose her nerve, she reached out and laced her fingers through his, holding on tight. Across the room, hidden by the towering floral arrangements and the ghostly portraits of long-dead Whitmores, Brandon watched them, his smile cold and calculating. And somewhere deep in her gut, Estella knew the real battle was just beginning. The sound of a summer storm rolled softly in the distance as Estella walked the quiet halls of her condo, barefoot, a glass of untouched wine in her hand. Lightning flickered at the edge of the sky, catching on the polished windows like a flash of doubt. Allison had gone out for the evening. He didn't say where, just kissed her lightly on the cheek and said he needed air. She hadn't stopped thinking since. Brandon's words over brunch had buried themselves deep in her chest. He'd looked at Allison like he already knew something, like he was just waiting for the right moment to strike. And Walter, he'd let it happen. Invited it, like some test she never agreed to take. She wandered into the office, drawn by the soft hum of the ceiling fan. Papers were spread across the desk, but her eyes drifted to the bookshelf in the corner, Allison's favorite spot since moving in. His presence was starting to thread through the space. A leather-bound notebook, a mug with chipped edges, a record he'd picked up from the vintage store down the street. Small things. But real. She reached for the notebook, hesitating, then slowly flipped it open. His handwriting was neat, methodical. Notes about renovations, sketches of a small building, calculations. Budget estimates. Estella frowned. These weren't just idle thoughts. They were blueprints. She turned another page and stopped. A clipped article lay between the pages. Dated nearly a year ago. A feature on a private real estate acquisition in Charleston. The buyer's name was blacked out with ink, but she knew the property. It had been whispered through Savannah's circles. A mystery investor saving historic properties. No one ever figured out who it was. She flipped again. A bank statement, half tucked into the back. A balance that made her breath catch. Not pocket change. Not family money. Millions. She closed the notebook slowly, heart pounding in her ears. "Who are you, Allison?" The front door opened behind her. She turned quickly, startled. He stepped in, shaking raindrops from his shoulders, eyes bright from the wet night air. His smile faltered the moment he saw her face. "Something wrong?" he asked, voice careful. She held the notebook out like it burned her fingers. "What is this?" Allison froze. "Where did you find that?" "It was just sitting there," she said. "What are you hiding?" He didn't answer immediately, just looked at her like he was weighing something he'd hoped he could avoid. "That's complicated." Her laugh came sharp and humorless. "That's not an answer." He stepped closer, rain still clinging to his shirt. "You want the truth?" "I want whatever it is you've been keeping from me since the moment we met," she said. "Because I'm starting to think this was never about some ridiculous dare." "You knew exactly what you were doing." His jaw tightened. "It wasn't a game, Estella." "Then what was it?" she demanded, the storm outside echoing in her voice. "Were you following me? Was this some plan?" "No," he said quickly. "God, no. I didn't even know who you were that night." "Then how do you explain this?" She pointed to the notebook. "The money, the properties. Why pretend to be someone else?" Allison sighed, dragging a hand through his hair. "Because when people find out who I am, what I have, they stop seeing me." She stared at him, stunned. "You think I wouldn't have noticed?" he said quietly. "That the second someone hears the word millionaire, they don't suddenly treat you like you're some prize or stepping stone?" Estella's voice dropped to a whisper. "So you lied." "I protected myself," he said, "from the same kind of people you've spent your whole life around." "You married me under false pretenses," she said, breath catching. "Do you even have a real job at that bakery?" He looked away, the answer clear in his silence. Estella stepped back like she'd been slapped. "Unbelievable." "I wasn't trying to deceive you," he said, following. I wanted to know what it felt like to be chosen without the weight of all this." "You weren't chosen," she snapped. "I was drunk. I was angry. You were a stranger with a charming smile and nothing to lose." His face crumpled slightly. "I had everything to lose." Silence crackled between them like the static before lightning. "You should have told me," she whispered, turning away. "And you would have stayed?" She froze. "You don't trust easily, Estella, and I get it. But I never wanted to take anything from you. He stepped closer, voice breaking. "I just wanted something real." "And now it isn't," she said, her back still to him. "Now I don't know what any of this is." "I'm still me," he said. "The man who made soup when you couldn't breathe. The one who stood beside you when your past came calling. That hasn't changed." She turned, eyes wet with unshed tears. "But it will. Because now you're not him. Now you're someone I don't know how to believe." He looked at her then. Really looked at her. And for once, there was no smile, no clever line. Just a man standing in the ruins of something he hadn't meant to destroy. "I'll give you space," he said quietly, "but I'm not walking away." She didn't answer. He left the room in silence, his footsteps soft but final. Estella stood there, the notebook heavy in her hands, the truth even heavier on her heart. The storm broke outside a moment later, rain slamming against the windows, thunder shaking the sky, and for the first time in weeks, she felt completely alone. The rain hadn't stopped by morning. It poured in steady sheets, draping Savannah in gray silence, muting the streets and cloaking the city in melancholy. Estella sat curled on the corner of her sofa, legs drawn up beneath her, the locket around her neck twisting between her fingers. She hadn't slept. Not really. The storm had passed sometime after midnight, but the noise inside her hadn't quieted. The notebook lay unopened on the table. She hadn't touched it again. She didn't need to. The damage was already done. The condo was quiet. Too quiet. Allison hadn't come back to the bedroom. He'd respected her distance, as promised. Maybe too well. His absence left an ache in the space between rooms, in the soft places of her chest that she'd tried so hard to protect. Flora's name flashed on her phone. Estella let it ring twice before answering. "Talk fast," she said, voice raspier than usual. "Good morning to you too," Flora said dryly. "So, Brandon?" Estella closed her eyes. "What now?" "He's been busy," Flora said. "He's been shopping around stories to a few lifestyle magazines, whispering about a socialite hotel heiress who married a mysterious man overnight. No names yet, but he's testing the waters." Estella sat up straighter, blood turning cold. "That was fast." "He never plays fair," Flora said, "and it gets worse." "Of course it does. He's been reaching out to board members at Whitmore hotels, setting up friendly meetings, the kind that end with doubts and questions." Estella's stomach twisted. "He's making a move." "Looks like it," Flora said, "and he's aiming straight for your credibility." Estella pinched the bridge of her nose. "This was never about me. It's about the company. He wants the brand, the name. Always has. And now he's got an angle," Flora said. "You, Allison." "The marriage. The secrecy." Estella stared out the rain-fogged window, the weight of it all pressing hard against her chest. "Can we shut it down?" "I'm trying," Flora said. "But we need to be smart. If Brandon starts digging into Allison's past, he'll find more than I did," Estella finished, voice flat. Flora didn't respond. "Thanks, Flora," she said after a beat. "Keep me posted." "You got it," her assistant replied. "And Estella, don't let him get under your skin. He's not worth it." Estella ended the call without answering. She sat for a long moment, the room closing in around her. Then she stood abruptly, slipping into her coat and grabbing her keys from the table. She found Allison at the bakery. Of course she did. The place had become his sanctuary, and she wasn't sure if that comforted her or hurt her more. Through the wide glass window, she saw him inside, sleeves rolled up, wiping flour off the counter while talking to Moses, the owner. There was something so easy about the way Allison moved, like he belonged there, like nothing outside those walls could touch him. But she knew better now. When she pushed open the door, the scent of cinnamon and rising bread hit her like memory. Allison looked up, and something unreadable passed through his eyes. He straightened, brushed his hands off, and nodded to Moses, who gave Estella a subtle glance before disappearing into the back. "You came," Allison said quietly. Estella stayed near the entrance, the glass door slowly closing behind her. "I needed to see for myself," she said. "If this is where you've really been..." He didn't flinch. "It is. I haven't lied about everything." "But you lied about enough." He nodded once. No excuses, no clever lines. Estella stepped forward slowly, the click of her heels lost against the old wood floor. "I looked through the notebook," she said. "You're not just a guy who wanted to feel normal. You're a man with properties, investments, and a team of attorneys I'm sure are on speed dial. You're not broke. You're not simple. You're not... this." Allison leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "You're right," he said. "But none of that means I wasn't honest about how I felt." Estella's throat tightened. "You should have told me the truth from the beginning." "I wanted to," he said. "After that first night, I kept thinking, Just one more day. One more chance to prove I was more than a number. And instead, you proved you could lie to my face for weeks. I was protecting something I hadn't even realized I wanted, he said softly. You. The words hit her like warm air after a storm. Sudden, disarming, real. But they didn't fix the crack. She looked around the bakery at the half-filled shelves, the handwritten signs, the people coming in from the rain. Do they know who you are? She asked. Allison shook his head. Just Moses, and he only found out last week. Estella laughed under her breath, no humor in it. You're good at hiding. He stepped closer, careful but sure. I'm not hiding now. She met his eyes, and something in her started to shift, just slightly. You need to understand, she said. Brandon isn't going to let this go. He's digging already. If he finds out the truth before we're ready, then we get ready, Allison said. We stop letting him control the narrative. You think it's that simple? No, he said gently. But I think we're stronger if we stop pretending we're on opposite sides. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and she saw the man who held her hand under the table. The man who made her soup when she couldn't breathe. The man who lied, yes, but also stayed. Estella's voice broke when she whispered, I don't know if I can trust you again. I'll earn it, he said without hesitation. For a moment the silence between them hummed with something raw and unspoken. Then the bakery door opened, and cold air rushed in. A courier stepped in with a yellow envelope. Estella Whitmore? He asked. She frowned, taking the envelope and opening it. Inside was a single photo. Grainy but clear. Her, Allison. On the front porch of her grandfather's house, his hand on her back, her leaning in. A note was clipped to the edge. Careful who you fall for. Not everyone's playing the same game. B. Estella felt her hands shake. Her vision narrowed. Allison reached for her arm. What is it? She looked up at him, breath shallow. It's starting. Estella didn't speak as she walked back to the car, the envelope clutched tight in her hands. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt thick, like the storm had only gone underground. Allison followed her quietly, careful not to crowd her, careful not to say the wrong thing. He knew that silence, the kind that came before something broke. She slid into the passenger seat without a word, staring straight ahead. The envelope sat in her lap, the photo folded neatly back inside, as if hiding it could slow the damage it had already done. Allison shut the driver's door gently. The bakery faded behind them as he pulled onto the street. I'm not sure what to say, he finally offered. Then don't, Estella said, voice sharp and low. They drove in silence for a long stretch, Savannah's historic homes blurring past the windows. Gas lamps flickered in the heavy afternoon haze. Cypress trees dripped over wrought iron fences. It should have felt like home. Instead, it felt like a stranger's city. He's trying to humiliate me, Estella said eventually, her tone like glass. He wants to rip me apart piece by piece, in public. Allison glanced at her, but she didn't turn. And now he has this, the photo. A little mystery man with a fake name and a real bank account. I'm not hiding anymore, Allison said. Let me tell the truth, about everything. Her jaw tightened. And what truth would that be exactly? That you have money? That you lied? That you let me make a fool of myself in front of the one person in this world who could ruin me? I never let you make a fool of yourself, he said. I was falling for you, Estella. I am. She turned then, Finally, her eyes blazing with something that looked a lot like heartbreak. "And you think that's enough?" "No," he said. "But it's the only place I can start from." She looked away again, her fingers trembling on her lap. "You know what I hate the most?" she whispered. "It's not that you lied. It's not even that you kept the truth hidden when I begged you to let me in." Allison waited. "It's that Brandon figured you out before I did." The words landed like weight, solid and unmovable. Allison pulled into the driveway of her condo and killed the engine. They sat there for a moment, the rain dripping steadily from the roof, tapping against the windshield like a clock ticking down. "I'll go public," he said. "Full name, business, assets. I'll make a statement. We'll get ahead of it." She didn't answer right away. "You think that'll fix it?" she finally asked. "You think the press will hear wealthy businessman secretly marries hotel heiress and not smell blood? I don't care what they say about me." "You should," she snapped, "because I'm tied to you now." She climbed out of the car, heels striking the wet pavement as she moved toward the building. He followed, slower, unsure if he was still invited. Inside, she kicked off her shoes and moved through the condo like she couldn't feel her own body. Her voice came from the living room, not angry anymore. Just tired. "There's a charity gala next week. Telfair Museum. Black tie. Everyone will be there. Press, board members, investors." He stepped into the room slowly. "You want me there?" "I need you there," she said. "Not as some mystery. Not as a whisper. I need people to see your face and know exactly who you are." He nodded. "Then that's what I'll give them." She crossed her arms, hugging herself, staring out the window. The sky had gone pale, heavy with more rain. "If we do this," she said quietly, "there's no going back." "I don't want to go back." She turned then, looking at him like she was seeing the man beneath all the missteps, all the secrets. "You still have time to walk away." "I'm not going anywhere." The air between them shifted, charged with something unspoken. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe the willingness to try. She stepped closer, the space between them narrowing. Her voice dropped. "You're going to stand beside me while the walls come down. While the people I've known for years look at me like I'm the scandal they've been waiting for." "Yes," he said. "And you'll answer for what you hid?" "Yes. And when the questions get ugly, I'll hold the line." She studied him for a long moment, her heart thudding so loud it echoed in her ears. "Then we do it together," she said. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance again. Not near, not threatening, just a reminder that the storm was never far away. Later that night, as Estella lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. A message from an unknown number. "You can dress him up, Estella. But the past has a way of coming back." She read it twice before locking the screen. The war had officially begun, and she wasn't sure which part terrified her more, the threat in Brandon's message, or the fact that for the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting alone. The night of the Telfair Gala arrived cloaked in anticipation and unease, Savannah humming beneath its formal skin. The city's elite gathered in the marble atrium of the museum, laughter echoing off art-lined walls, champagne flutes clinking beneath chandeliers older than most of the guests. It was a pageant of legacy. Old names, old money, old grudges dressed in tailored suits and silk gowns. Estella stood just inside the grand entrance, the locket resting above her collarbone like a quiet reminder of everything she carried. Her gown was midnight black, sleek and unyielding, like armor, but her hands, hidden in the folds of her clutch, trembled. "All eyes are going to be on us tonight," she murmured. They already are, Allison said, stepping beside her, adjusting the cuff of his tuxedo. He looked like he'd been born to wear it. Calm, controlled, but his jaw flexed just once, the only sign of nerves she could spot. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she whispered, then forced a breath. "But we walk in anyway." Together they stepped into the light. Conversations dulled as they entered, just slightly. Enough to notice. Faces turned. Whispers followed. Some smiled, too brightly. Others turned away, polite behind their flutes, but already cataloging every detail. Estella met the stares head-on, chin lifted. Allison's hand settled gently at the small of her back, grounding her, but not leading. Just there. "Steady." "Estella." A voice slid through the crowd like a knife. Brandon stood near the central sculpture, a flute in one hand, his smile smooth as polished stone. His suit was perfect, his presence planned. "You look formidable," he said, eyes flicking briefly to Allison. "And you've brought your mystery husband. How charming." Allison offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good evening, Brandon." Brandon tilted his head. "You know, I've been trying to find out more about you, but you've done an impressive job staying in the shadows. Almost too impressive." Estella's voice cut in, crisp. "That's because you've been looking in the wrong places," Brandon laughed softly. "Or maybe you've just been too trusting." Allison's smile didn't waver. "Sometimes trust pays off." "And sometimes," Brandon said, leaning closer, "it makes fools of people who should know better." The air tightened between them. Allison's hand didn't leave Estella's back. She didn't flinch. "Enjoy your evening, Brandon," she said, her tone final. They moved past him, the crowd parting just enough, the tension lingering like perfume. They found their way to the main rotunda where press cameras flashed in soft bursts, capturing the who's who of Savannah society. Estella turned to Allison. "He's going to make a scene. He's waiting for it." "Then we make it first," he said. Before she could speak, a voice over the speakers cleared its throat, calling the room to attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I may," Walter Whitmore's voice boomed with aged authority as he stepped to the front of the rotunda, champagne in hand. "Thank you for joining us this evening in support of the Telfair Preservation Fund." Polite applause. Cameras turned. Walter's gaze swept the crowd, calm, commanding. Then it landed on Estella and Allison. "I'd also like to take this moment," he said slowly, "to formally acknowledge my granddaughter and her husband, who have caused quite the stir, I hear." Murmurs rippled. Estella felt her breath stop. Walter smiled faintly. Estella Whitmore has never done anything halfway. And neither, it seems, has the man she chose. Then he stepped aside. And all at once, Allison moved forward, into the center of the circle of light. Every eye turned. "My name is Allison Hartwell," he said, voice steady. "Yes, the name is real. Yes, I have resources. Holdings. A private foundation. I've spent the past few years investing quietly in Southern preservation projects, like this museum, because I believe in protecting the past to honor the future." Click. Flash. Click. But what matters most tonight isn't the business or the money. It's her. He looked at Estella, and something shifted in the room. She didn't know who I was when we met. I didn't want her to, because I was tired of being seen as a number on a check. She saw something else. And I saw a woman brave enough to call me out, and daring enough to marry me before I could think twice. Laughter, soft, surprised, spread around the room. Allison took a breath. So yes, we're unconventional. Yes, we surprised people. But I'm proud to stand beside her, and I'm not hiding anymore. The silence that followed was sharp. Held breath, suspended judgment, and then applause. Slow at first, then rising. Walter lifted his glass. To the Hartwells, he said. The name echoed. Estella didn't realize she was crying until Allison took her hand, thumb brushing her cheek. Still not walking away, he whispered. And she, through the tears, whispered back, then don't ever start. The gala light softened to a dim gold as the night wore on, but Estella's heart still beat too hard against her ribs. She moved through the crowd like a dancer on a thin wire, every smile, every handshake sharpened by the knowledge that people weren't just watching. They were waiting. Waiting for a crack, waiting for proof that the golden girl of Savannah had finally stumbled. Allison remained close, his presence a steady force beside her. His public reveal had shifted something in the room. Some guests softened, offering polite congratulations. Others stiffened, their smiles too thin. Brandon, lurking near the bar, watched it all unfold with cold calculation. You did it, Estella said under her breath as they crossed toward the garden terrace. You actually did it. Allison glanced sideways, that quiet, infuriating smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Told you, I don't scare easy. She almost laughed, almost, but the knot in her chest refused to loosen. There was still too much left hanging in the balance. On the terrace, the humid night wrapped around them. Strings of fairy lights twisted through the trees, casting soft halos of light over the marble statues and manicured hedges. A string quartet played somewhere just out of sight, their music threading through the night air like a promise too delicate to hold. Estella leaned against the stone railing, her arms crossing tightly over her chest. I keep waiting for it to collapse, she said quietly. It won't, Allison said. Not if we don't let it. She looked at him, at the way the light caught the lines of his face, at the steadiness in his eyes, even after everything. Part of her wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. Another part, the part built on years of betrayal and loss, curled inward, bracing for impact. You don't understand how fast this city turns, she said. They lift you up, just to tear you down. Maybe, he said. Or maybe they only tear down what wasn't real to begin with. His voice was so gentle, so certain, that it cracked something inside her. I'm tired, she admitted, the words barely a whisper. He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him but not touching. Not until she let him. You don't have to fight alone anymore, he said. You never did. Estella closed her eyes, swallowing the ache that rose up sharp and unexpected. You make it sound easy. It's not, he said, his voice low. It's just worth it. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft strains of music and the heavy scent of magnolias blooming nearby. Then, faintly, she heard footsteps approaching. She straightened instinctively, tension snapping back into her spine. Allison tensed too, sensing it. Brandon's voice slid through the darkness, smooth and sour. Lovely evening for a confession, isn't it? Estella turned slowly, facing him. Brandon stood at the edge of the terrace, one hand casually tucked into his pocket, the other swirling a glass of scotch. What do you want? Estella asked, her voice cool, sharp. Brandon smiled, slow and wolfish. Only to offer my congratulations. Quite the performance tonight. Almost had me convinced. She said nothing, the air between them thick and humming. But see, Estella, Brandon continued, stepping closer, The thing about foundations built on lies, they don't hold up when the storms come. You would know, Allison said, voice like iron wrapped in silk. Brandon chuckled. Touché. He shifted his gaze back to Estella, softer now, almost pitying. You think unveiling him was enough? That Savannah's going to forget you lied about your marriage, about who he was? We didn't lie, Estella said through gritted teeth. We protected our privacy. There's a difference, Brandon tisked under his breath. The court of public opinion doesn't care about semantics, sweetheart. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails digging into her palms. You're wasting your breath, Allison said, stepping forward, shielding her with his body in a way so subtle, so natural, it made Estella's throat tighten. Brandon shrugged, raising his glass. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just setting the stage. He smiled one last time, that smug, knowing smile, and disappeared into the crowd, leaving the taste of unfinished war in his wake. Estella sagged back against the railing, the weight of it all pressing down again. Allison turned to her, his voice low and steady. Let him spin his stories. We'll build something stronger. You sound so sure, she said, blinking against the sting in her eyes. He reached out then, brushing a stray curl from her face with such tenderness it shattered every last piece of her fear. Because this, he said, his hand curling gently against her cheek, isn't built on lies. Not anymore. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Estella allowed herself to believe it might just be true. The next morning, the sun rose heavy and thick over Savannah, casting long shadows across Estella's penthouse windows. She stood at the kitchen island, fingers curled around a mug of untouched coffee, her mind racing faster than the news scrolling across the tablet propped up nearby. There it was, front and center. A headline splashed across the local society page. Mystery millionaire husband. Secrets behind Savannah's most scandalous marriage. Photos. Speculation. Thinly veiled accusations. They didn't have the full story yet, but Brandon had planted the seed, and it was growing fast. Estella set the mug down harder than necessary. The clatter echoed through the empty space. Across the room, Allison leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her with a careful, unreadable expression. You knew it was coming, he said. She exhaled sharply. Doesn't make it hurt less. He pushed off the wall, crossing to her slowly. They don't know you, he said. They know headlines, gossip. We can survive this. She looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of doubt. He gave her none. But before she could answer, her phone buzzed against the counter. Unknown number. She hesitated, then picked it up. Estella Whitmore. A familiar voice slid down the line like oil. Morning, Estella, Brandon said, too pleasant. Hope I didn't catch you at a bad time. Her jaw tightened. You're always a bad time. He chuckled, low and unbothered. Listen, I'm feeling generous. Thought I'd offer you a way out. A way out of what exactly? She said, voice razor sharp. The embarrassment. The slow bleed of your precious family name. The destruction of everything you've built. She said nothing, her silence enough to make him continue. I have a proposal, Brandon said, voice smooth. Sell me your shares in Whitmore Hotels, quietly, cleanly. No lawsuits, no public meltdowns. Walk away with dignity. Estella laughed, sharp and humorless. You think I'm that easy to scare? I think you're smart enough to know a losing battle when you see one, Brandon said. And trust me, Estella, I'm just getting started. You think a few photos are bad? Wait until the deeper stories start surfacing. The ones about Allison. About you. Her hand clenched around the phone. You don't have anything, she snapped. Not yet, Brandon agreed cheerfully. But you know how people love a good scandal. The more outrageous, the better. It doesn't even have to be true. She swallowed hard, the weight of every hard-earned year pressing against her chest. You're wasting your time, she said coldly. I'm not selling. A beat of silence. Shame, Brandon said lightly. I always liked you, Estella. Even when you were too stubborn for your own good. The line went dead. She dropped the phone onto the counter, shaking. Allison was there immediately, steady and close, but not crowding her. What did he want? He asked. She looked at him, anger flashing in her chest. He wants me to sell. To disappear before he can destroy me publicly. Allison's jaw tightened, the first real crack in his calm. And what are you going to do? He asked quietly. She stared at the phone, then out the wide window where the city sprawled beneath a bruising sky. I'm going to fight, she said. You won't be alone, he said. For the first time, her voice softened. I know. Later that afternoon, they sat together in Walter's study, the old man's sanctuary, all dark wood and deep chairs and heavy books. Walter listened without interruption as Estella laid everything out. Brandon's threats, the article, the phone call. When she finished, the room was heavy with silence. Walter tapped his cane against the floor once, thoughtfully. He's desperate, Walter said at last. Estella blinked. He doesn't look desperate. Only the desperate lash out like that, Walter said. If he truly had something damning, he wouldn't bother calling you. He'd let it bleed out into the public and sit back and smile. She sat back, absorbing that. You still have leverage, Estella, Walter said. Your name, your work, your legacy. Brandon can't take that unless you hand it to him. Her throat tightened. It feels like it's already slipping away. Walter leaned forward, his eyes sharp and clear. Then hold tighter. He shifted his gaze to Allison, studying him with the same ruthless intensity he once reserved for business deals. And you, Walter said. You ready to be hated? Questioned? Dragged through the dirt just for standing next to her? Allison didn't flinch. I'm ready for all of it. Walter nodded once, slow and approving. Good, he said, because this family doesn't run. Estella felt the heat behind her eyes, but she blinked it away. There wasn't time for tears. Not now. Later that evening, as they walked back through the quiet streets of the historic district, Allison slipped his hand into hers. She squeezed back, grateful for the simple, solid weight of him beside her. The battle lines were drawn now. There would be no easy way forward, no mercy. But for the first time, Estella felt something stirring in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope. The morning sun cracked through the heavy drapes of the Whitmore Hotel ballroom, spilling gold across the rows of empty tables, the polished floors, the gleaming glasses waiting to catch the light of the evening's charity gala. Estella stood at the center of it all, arms crossed tight, heart beating too fast against her ribs. Tonight was more than just an event. It was her stand. Her declaration that she wouldn't be chased into the shadows, that Whitmore Hotels and everything her family had built would not be a casualty of whispers and greed. Flora bustled in from the side entrance, a clipboard in hand and a determined set to her jaw. Stage is set, Flora said briskly. Press will be in the side galleries. No questions until after the speeches. Walter already approved the guest list. Brandon's name is nowhere on it. Estella arched an eyebrow. And if he shows anyway? Flora's mouth tightened. Then he'll be escorted out faster than he can flash his smirk. A small, tired smile tugged at Estella's lips. Thank you. "You're not alone," Flora said simply. Across the ballroom, Allison entered, his tuxedo jacket slung over one arm, his sleeves rolled up. He looked out of place among the formality, and yet, somehow, more solid than anything else in the room. When their eyes met, something loosened in Estella's chest. "You ready?" he asked, his voice cutting through the hum of final preparations. "Not even close," she said. He smiled. "Good. Means you'll be sharp." As Flora disappeared to check on the florists, Estella crossed the floor to him. He caught her hand as she reached him, threading their fingers together without hesitation. "I hate this," she admitted under her breath. "I know," he said, "but you're doing it anyway. That's what makes you dangerous." She leaned into his touch, letting herself breathe him in for just a second before the night stole them away again. Hours later, the ballroom buzzed with the weight of 100 conversations. Glittering gowns swept across the floors. Tuxedos gleamed beneath the soft chandeliers. Glasses clinked, laughter floated, but underneath it all, a current of speculation, of sharpened smiles and hungry curiosity. Estella stood at the edge of the raised stage, hands gripping the edge of the podium, the speech she'd written burning a hole in her mind. She glanced back once, found Allison watching her from the first row, steady and unflinching. She stepped up to the microphone. The room softened to a hush, anticipation thick enough to choke on. "Good evening," she began, voice steady even as her hands trembled out of sight. "Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate not just the preservation of Savannah's beauty, but the endurance of its spirit." Applause broke out, polite, practiced, but she held up a hand. "I want to speak to you not just as a Whitmore," she said, her voice dropping lower, pulling the room closer, "but as someone who knows what it feels like to be questioned, judged, misunderstood." A ripple went through the crowd. "Over the past few weeks," she continued, "my name, my life, has been dragged through conversations I didn't start, stories I didn't write, rumors that barely scraped the surface of truth. Whispers now, a shifting of bodies, heads turning, she breathed through it. I married a man who many of you didn't know, a man who wasn't introduced at a gala or featured in a society column, a man who didn't come wrapped in the expected package." She smiled then, small, fierce. "And that's exactly why I chose him." Allison from his seat never looked away. "I didn't fall in love with a title or a resume. I fell in love with loyalty, with integrity, with someone who, when the storms came, didn't run." The room held its breath. "And tonight," Estella said, lifting her chin, "I stand here not asking for your permission, not seeking your approval. I stand here to remind you, legacy is not built on appearances. It's built on choices, on resilience, on love." A beat of silence, then the first clap, followed by another, then more, until the room rose around her, applause sweeping through the air like a tide. Walter stood too, his cane tapping once against the marble floor, before he gave her a rare, proud nod. And somewhere, near the shadows by the bar, Brandon watched with narrowed eyes, a man who realized too late he had played the wrong hand. Estella stepped down from the stage, heart hammering, soul lighter than it had been in months. Allison was there waiting for her, his hand reaching for hers without hesitation. "You were brilliant," he said, voice rough with something that sounded dangerously close to awe. She smiled through the burn of tears in her throat. "We were brilliant." As the orchestra swelled and the night spun around them, Estella clung to that moment, to him, knowing the battle wasn't over, but finally believing They had already won the part that mattered most. The early morning light spilled across the quiet streets of Savannah, turning the cobblestones into rivers of gold. Estella stood at the riverfront, the breeze lifting strands of her hair, the locket around her neck warm against her skin. The city felt different today, not because it had changed, but because she had. Allison joined her without a word, sliding his hand into hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. For a long time, they just stood there, watching the river move, the world slow and easy around them. "You still thinking about it?" he asked finally. She smiled faintly. "Not the way I thought I would." The scandal had burned hot and fast, but it hadn't destroyed her. Whitmore Hotels had weathered the storm, stronger than before. Brandon's attempts to undermine her had crumbled under the weight of his own arrogance. People had moved on, as they always did, hungry for newer, shinier gossip. But Estella wasn't chasing their approval anymore. "I spent so long fighting to protect a name," she said quietly, staring at the water. "But it was never the name that mattered. It was what I chose to build with it." Allison squeezed her hand. "You built something better than a name, Estella. You built a life." She turned to him then, taking in the man who had seen her at her worst and never once let go. No pretense. No games. Just a man who chose her, again and again. "And you," she said, voice soft. "You chose to stay." He smiled, that familiar, easy smile that still undid her. "I didn't just stay," he said. "I built it with you." Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't look away. She let him see everything. The gratitude, the fear, the hope. "We're not perfect," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "We're better." The river moved steady and sure beneath them, just like the life stretching ahead. Uncertain, imperfect, but theirs. Estella slipped the locket from around her neck, holding it between them. She opened it, revealing the tiny pressed flower her mother had once tucked inside. A reminder that beauty could survive even the harshest storms. She closed it gently, then placed it in Allison's hand. "Roots," she said, echoing Walter's words. "It's the roots you lay that hold you steady." He curled his fingers around the locket, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, and neither was she. In the golden quiet of a city that had once threatened to swallow her whole, Estella Whitmore chose love, chose forgiveness, chose herself. It wasn't the life she had planned. It was better. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way.